Well, you might have heard this guy ask what the heck is going on with the Rockies a couple of times if you follow the Rockies insiders. So I had to bring him on the show and ask him what the heck is going on with the Rockies.
You are Locked On Rockies, your daily Colorado Rockies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Rock on Rockies fans, welcome into the Locked On Rockies podcast for today, the second day of April in the year 2025. I'm your host of the Locked On Rockies podcast, bringing you your daily Colorado Rockies talk right here in the Locked On Podcast Network, where you can find your team every day. And I thank you for making us your first listen of the day. You can find us free and streaming on your favorite streaming services and on the Locked On Rockies YouTube channel. And I'm not the only one bringing you daily Rockies content. I am joined by the Rockies insider himself, Patrick Lyons. He's bringing you all sorts of Rockies content as well, all across the social media world and on YouTube as well. Patrick, thank you so much for your time today.
Excellent. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the invite, Paul. And, depending on what the age rating is on this show, we could say what the heck is up with the Rockies, or we could take it one step further. I'll let you lead the way, though, on that.
Little HE double hockey sits. Let's go with what the hell is up with the Rockies, because I'm in a spot where I'm frustrated by stuff, but I'm not surprised the team is 1-3 at this point. I think when you look at it, of course, you're really frustrated that this team could be in a completely different position and being an exciting team that maybe is raising eyebrows, but instead we're 1-3. But people have heard me ranting and raving a lot on the show lately and this week. So I want to start on the positive note. Can we just focus on how important it is that they have this starting rotation back? It's obviously we need to see how the rest of the year pans out, but the Rockies are a better team when they have this rotation. Now, I am worried about Antonio Senzatella, but let's at least focus on the positives here. When they're healthy, when they have this rotation, this is the best Rockies rotation in years.
Back in 2022, which feels like a lifetime ago, I think they lost 94 games. It wasn't pretty. But going into that season, despite the fact with Story and John Gray gone, there wasn't a ton of hope. There was a general thought that, well, the starting rotation is good enough that they won't lose 100 games. And I think to most people, it's hard to know what a 100-loss team looks like. I think a lot of Rockies fans now know what a 100-loss team looks like at the onset of a season. But the rotation was always strong enough that it was going to keep the team in games, and the bullpen was going to be at least good enough, and the offense good enough that, again, they would not lose 100 games. And having that kind of a rotation is critical, especially if you don't have an offense that is great, which we know they're struggling with right now, or a bullpen that is going to blow some saves, which they did a lot more last season, and they've certainly started off 2025 in the same way. But I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the rotation and the depth and the quality. And, I think anybody out there in Rockies Nation could write down their starters 1 through 5. And then by the end of the year, it could be the exact opposite way, where it goes 5-1 in terms of who actually had the most success this season. And that speaks to the depth of the rotation. Might not be any real true aces. And Herman Marquez, I do see you out there, and I do recognize what you've been able to do in the past when healthy. But even still, that kind of depth is going to allow you to stay in a lot more games than in years prior.
Yeah, and again, I mean, these are guys that we know, and I mean, we're talking about Herman Marquez. We're talking about a guy that is going to go down as one of the best, if not the best, statistical Rockies pitcher of all time, depending on, how this season goes and the trade deadline and stuff. We're talking about Kyle Freeland, who I've always been a big believer and a big fan of. Again, not a top of the rotation guy, but someone that has brought a lot to this. And I hope that Antonio Senzatella proves me wrong. I'm just worried about how that game goes at Coors. I'm worried about how that game goes in the middle of July when the ball is going to be traveling a little bit more. It was great to see how legit the Rockies defense was, but there are warning signs. But for the Rockies rotation to only allow 2 runs off of 4 starts on the road, mind you, as well here, and especially compared to how the last season started, I mean, that at least is something we can't ignore. That is a good sign for the Colorado Rockies.
0.84 ERA after these first 4 games by the starting rotation, bullpen north of 10. But you're right. And I think that's super important for them to stay in these games. And in terms of Antonio Senzatella, let's not forget the spring that he had where I think he only gave up 3 runs across his 5 starts. And for his first full season back after Tommy John, that's obviously the best possible spring that you can have. So, okay, this was just one start. It certainly could have been a lot worse. It ends up being scoreless. And that's the one game that you've won up to this point. So overall, I think we know what Senzatella is bringing to the table. There's going to be a lot of contact. There were a lot more strikeouts for him in spring. So maybe that's something that does end up changing, and just, he was off his game. So small sample size, you take those things with a grain of salt, but Senzatella as your number 5, that's really solid with 5 healthy starters in your rotation when you go back and look at what Senzatella is like in an average season.
Can you give me some insight into, I know the team hasn't been back and you haven't been in the locker room quite yet with the team still on the road here. How important was that start for Kyle Freeland? I mean, to not only set the season off and set the tone there, and of course, we can dive into the discussion to pull him there. I personally feel like it was a little early. I'll buy the fatigue thing, but I've seen Kyle Freeland, and I know the competitor that he is. I have a hard time. I think Kyle Freeland's going to bat a little bit for his team there, but just, can you give me any insight into just how important that was for Kyle to go out there and be that good on opening day, especially with how last year started?
Yeah, speaking with Kyle down in spring training down at Salt River Fields in Scottsdale in February, when I was down there for a week, he really felt like, 2024 ended on a high note. Other than that final start against the Cardinals that ended up pushing his ERA above 5, when he came back from the 60-day IL, he was outstanding for 15, 16 starts there. It was one of the best runs of his entire career, and was able to kind of put behind him everything that happened at the beginning of the season, both in Arizona, both in that strange play at the plate where he was a pinch runner and collided with pitcher.
I completely forgot about that.
Right? Like, it was an awful, and again, it was just a really bad start for the Rockies in general, who, let's not forget, the beginning of last year, they trailed in their first 31 games.
Crazy.
And on the flip side, they've led in all 4 games so far. Small sample size, but still, that's a positive. So for Kyle, the results on opening day weren't going to be that critical, because he knows that isn't what defines him. But I think for all of us that are on the outside looking in, there are tons of narratives that did not exist because he went out and he shoved for those 6 innings on exactly 1 year to the day in which, the Diamondbacks absolutely destroyed the Rockies, and they were trying to catch their breath the rest of the season after that point from game number 1. So, to Freeland, I don't think that was as big of a story as I think everybody on the outside looking in would have it. I was surprised that after 67 pitches, he was done. And in my community of folks that we text and talk to, it was like, yeah, I'm in favor of leaving him in for 1 more inning. I know it's a very long season, but it's also a long season for the bullpen. That's another piece to it, is that because Freeland had been so efficient at 67 pitches through 6 innings, again, that's 11 pitches per inning on average. And as much as, the 100 pitch count is made to be a big thing for starting pitchers, there's also just high stress in general on arms. And so if you're having 30 pitch innings, that can do just as much damage as throwing 105, 110 pitches, because there's so much stress in a short period of time. So that being said, I thought, you know what, let's avoid the bullpen right now. Who knows how much you're going to end up needing them the next several days. Let him go out there and do his thing. I know Buddy prefers to avoid having his relievers come in with guys on base, which, let's say Freeland gives up a single and walks a hitter. You go, all right, now it's time to get him out of the game. Then Kinley comes in with 2 guys on board, and you've got a problem in that way too. So I do understand that argument, but I very much was also in favor of allowing Freeland to go out for the start of the 7th inning.
Yeah, and I mean, I think he's just such an important Rocky. I think he is. I don't know if maybe it's too, but he seems like he is a prime candidate to be the Charlie Blackmon of this year's team, as a team that is looking for a guy that has been there, the guy that knows the challenges of Colorado, the guy that has seen the success. Because now, I mean, it is just what, those 3 pitchers and Ryan McMahon are they the last remaining members of this roster that know what playoff baseball for Colorado is like?
Yeah, they're the last ones from 2018. And then, as you said, Senzatella, Marquez, and Freeland know exactly what that was like from 2017, when they were all, young players. Marquez didn't have rookie eligibility anymore. Actually, that's not true. I think he still did in 2017. But regardless, it's interesting how it's juxtaposed at this point now, where it seems like a blink of an eye that he was going out there making the start for the home opener in 2017, and in July of that year, taking that no-hitter into the ninth against the White Sox, and now he's that veteran that's keeping an eye on all those young starting pitchers, and that was a big part of the conversation down in the early parts of spring training is Freeland working with these young guys like Chase Dollander and Sean Sullivan, Carson Palmquist, is allowing those young guys to have a little bit of breathing room and understand you're going to make mistakes and you're going to have to make adjustments. And that was something that Freeland himself said he didn't do quite as well as he should have when he was younger. So many players get to the majors based on a swing or a stance or an approach or a pitch mix that gets them there. And so they're very reticent to say, I need to make a change. And so for Freeland in 2019, when he got sent back down to the minors, he wasn't a fan of that, rightfully so, and didn't necessarily maybe want to make those changes. That's one of the things now that Kyle Freeland, as one of the veterans of this rotation, gets to impart on some of those young guys when they do finally get a chance to come up and be a part of the rotation. They will benefit from everything that Freeland has now learned over his 9 years with the Rockies.
All right, we've talked a lot about the good stuff, the rotation, easily the most exciting. The defense, too, of course, but that was kind of something we expected. There's a lot of gold on gloves on this team, so not as big of a surprise. But the two big blemishes, the bullpen and the offense. I want to ask a little bit about that coming up here in the second segment of today's episode of Locked On Rockies. Before we do that, though, got to tell you about the folks that help make this show possible, and that includes Wonderful Pistachios. If you're looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious, then crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. You can even skip the mess if you're out there at the office and you don't want to have a bunch of shells all over the place. They got the no shells variety that'll help you keep things quick and on the go. Or you can try out a bunch of different flavors as well. You can see more information and see all the options for yourself at wonderfulpistachios.com. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com. That's wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Locked On Rockies here with Patrick Lyons, the Rockies insider. You can find on all of the social medias there. Your show mostly goes live on X, right? That's usually where the Rockies insider goes live when you're breaking things down.
You can get it very easily on X, or you can also go over to YouTube and leave comments there as well. And then there's the Rockies Insider newsletter that I'm putting out each and every week with some of my general musings and touching on the history of the Colorado Rockies and of Coors Field and its 30th year of 30th anniversary celebration. So a lot of good stuff.
I'm actually really excited. I actually get to go. I will be. I get to go. I will be at Coors at the end of the month for the Cincinnati series. Buddy of mine getting married at Red Rocks, so I'm getting back into the city, which is great, and it lines up perfectly. So I'm really excited because I love Coors. I'm really interested to see what they're going to do here. Are you ready to break some news that I'm sure you know? Because they're not going to be the only team without a team Hall of Fame anymore, right? That's going to be a big announcement this year.
Don't hold your breath. I don't think the Rockies are a club that looks to the Marlins to figure out, whether or not they need a team Hall of Fame, but the Marlins did it. Jeff Conine, the first guy going in, Mr. Marlin. Hey, wait a minute. Rockies have a Mr. Rocky. And, again, these are some of the things that I think fans have been dying for. And right now really would have been the time, and maybe it will, but again, don't hold your breath. But now really will be that time in which, the on-field product is, obviously leaves a lot to be desired, but if you can provide a little bit of fan service with a Hall of Fame, which again, the players are going to be there, but there, I think a lot of fans that maybe don't know some of the great players or the great games or the great moments. And so you can honor all of those different things, including the history of baseball in Colorado in general, when it wasn't a major league city. So a big opportunity there for the Rockies to maybe get something like that going, but I'll believe it when I see it.
And I'll believe it when I see it when the Rockies offense stops striking out double-digit times and this bullpen gets it together. A basic question here, and maybe you can use it to dive into some areas here. What's your bigger concern, the offense or the bullpen? Me personally, it's the offense. I think what we're seeing right now looks exactly like the approach last year. And you can always point to pitching and stuff like that, but I kind of think some of these young guys are going to be able to iron it out a little bit. And I gotta believe in Tyler Kinley. I think he might be someone that's starting to feel a little bit of pressure here with how many young options the Rockies might have. But for me, it's this offense. There's moments, there's opportunities, there's guys that have done stuff. Hunter Goodman, I think, obviously, when you're talking about, maybe for those that weren't following the Rockies, the surprise, but for those that have known, I mean, they've had their eyes on Hunter Goodman for a while. I think my biggest concern is this team can't stop striking out in the double digits on offense.
Well, you think it's the offense that's the biggest issue, but I also think it's the offense because, yes, there's a lot of good, young, talented arms in that bullpen and a lot more that are down in AAA. So the bullpen as a whole is, more than just the 8 guys you typically see down there in right center field when you're at Coors Field. So they have those opportunities for other players to break through and make a positive impact. And some of that could also just be usage, setting guys up for success. I mean, look at Anthony Molina last year. If you break down his performances, home versus road, he was way better at home, oddly enough. And you say sub 4 ERA, okay, maybe you've got something there. So the usage, I think, is one of those things that can really help the bullpen play up a little bit. And as rough as they've been, they haven't been atrocious, which is, again, better than the beginning of last season. If you remember the Marlins series where they coughed up a couple 5-run leads late in the game. And so it was historically bad last year. It's definitely better now. The results haven't been there, but the offense has to be the thing that is most concerning, because the Rockies have talked and they do a good job talking, but they don't walk that talk in a lot of different ways. But they've been trying to cut down the strikeouts, and everything that they've tried just hasn't worked. And, one of the biggest holes I think that the Rockies have right now, and they've had for a couple of years, is they don't have a superstar. They don't have the aircraft carrier that they're certainly paying for right now in a Chris Bryant. But think about how much better or what percentage better would someone like Ryan McMahon be with a perennial MVP candidate behind him, like a Nolan Arenado or Chris Bryant in his prime. It's going to be that much more. And then if Ryan McMahon is that much more, if Tovar's batting in front of him, he's going to be that much better. Doyle in front of him is that much better. But when you've got these black holes in the middle of your lineup, it can make it very easy to pitch around certain players. And they're not really able to pass the buck and say, I'm going to take my walks and I'm going to go ahead and let the guy behind me do it. They're not doing that. They just don't have that approach. And so it's really concerning that they continue to strike out as much as they've been, and as much as they say that they're working on those things. There doesn't really seem to be a solution right now for them.
And it's not just young guys. I mean, we're watching, unfortunately, again, I hate that he's at the victim of this, but the Chris Bryant performance, especially to start the year, I mean, when you're looking at that, that's about as flat as you can get. The amount of left on base in critical situations when he was batting cleanup, and the fact that it's strikeouts and not even making contact with the ball, that's a huge problem. And you mentioned, man, I think Ryan McMahon would be on DJ LeMahieu level if he wasn't the main focus. If Ryan McMahon had a Nolan Arenado, had someone that was contributing at the level that Arenado was for when DJ was, I just think that would make them so much better. I think you nail it there. And while I do think Tovar and Doyle have superstar potential, there's a lot to work on there. These are guys that strike out 180, 200 times in a season. There's still a long way to go until those guys are having the impact on offense that we saw when the Rockies were making the playoffs. Let's not forget that Charlie Blackmon, of course, was one of the biggest offensive threats there. I want to mention here, we're talking about that. Can you at least run me through the last week of spring training, the decision to move Nolan Jones, bringing in Moniak here, and the decision that Veen doesn't make the team? I mean, I was pretty up in arms about that, but bringing in Mickey kind of makes it a little bit more interesting with that. But now we're talking again about big offensive threats, and I know I think I underestimate the warning signs that we were seeing with Nolan Jones, but that was a guy that could have played that role. Can you give any insight into just the thought process on that last week of spring training to set the roster where it was before the season started?
Yeah, it was definitely curious. I think, the Rockies roster is very fragile in a lot of different ways. And I think, again, you could also view it as just having tons of potential. Again, when you look at who's in AA and more specifically in AAA on the 40-man roster, there is that potential. But I think right now the front office and manager Bud Black are very focused on the right here, right now in front of them, the month of March and April, and avoiding 100 losses. And so when you make a decision to carry certain veterans on the roster, it's done in hopes that you're going to avoid 100 losses, and that's going to provide, some kind of benefit to the team. The domino effect of Tyro Estrada going down, who was your biggest free agent acquisition, $4 million guaranteed. That was the third lowest amount ever, awarded to a free agent by a team this offseason. So they hadn't invested a lot. And we've been talking a lot about, and I know you're doing it, and anyone paying attention to the Rockies know that they have a very deep outfield assemblage of players, and something's got to give because there's only 3 spots in the outfield. And even if you have one of them as the DH and just forget about Chris Bryant, that's 4 spots for, 9 guys. And so there's only so much room. And the Rockies, unfortunately, have a way of operating in which, quote unquote, these things will sort themselves out, instead of saying, well, we're going to sort it out for the situation. And we've got our money riding on this guy and this guy, and these other ones, not so much. So we're going to jettison them. Instead, they sort of waited to get to this point where Nolan Jones struggled in the spring, still questions about his back. And despite the fact that he was 4th in NL MVP voting less than 2 years ago, they sold low on him. And they bought really high on a guy like Tyler Freeman that still allows them to go about their game plan of load management, which in and of itself is a game plan to avoid 100 losses, not necessarily take guys to the next level. Giving Doyle and Tovar and McMahon and Tolia maybe on occasion a day off isn't necessarily going to make them better players. It's going to allow them to feel better deeper into the season. And so you might squeeze an extra 5% statistically out of them, but that in and of itself doesn't make them better. And it doesn't really make your team and their future prospects any better. That being said, that's just how the front office sees those moves, and just kind of, swapping out one 26-year-old outfielder in Nolan Jones for another one in Mickey Moniak, and, bringing in a utility player, and, getting younger by allowing 38-year-old Charlie Blackmon to retire, and then bringing in 34-year-old Nick Martini. If that's a youth movement, that's an interesting interpretation of it. But nevertheless, that is some of the thinking and logic that went into that final week of spring training before opening day last Friday.
Well, and I don't know if you saw the Bob Nightingale piece talking about managers, Bruce Bochy, and I can't remember who, but basically there's a little excerpt that says there's no pressure. They want Bud. They think that they're in the right spot. But what has to happen for there to be any pressure for these guys? I mean, there really doesn't seem like there's any pressure on Bud Black. The decision is his to return. Not doesn't matter how the season goes. It's if you want it, you're in. We're set. We're sold. And when do those questions start to bring any sort of pressure? I mean, maybe there won't be, but it is. I think that is something that has to be raised here. As again, we're talking about a team that tells us draft and develop, wait and see. We're ready. We have boom. These things are coming. Well, I want to see it. I'm watching young guys strike out still. I'm watching Michael Tolia start the season the way he's starting, and he's very important to this team.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. I don't know what is going to be that final straw that breaks the camel's back. I don't even know if the camel is straining at all right now. There might only be a couple strands of straw even on the camel's back as it is, when it feels like a camel should be overloaded with straw. I don't really know what it's going to take for them to go in a different direction, because I think there's been enough evidence to suggest that the powers that be, their game plan just really isn't working out. In 2021, I know Bill Schmidt was only the interim GM at that point, but he was still the one making the decisions. And it was, very much kicking the can down the road of, hey, we're about 2 years away. And at the beginning of 2023, hey, we're about a year or so off of what the Arizona Diamondbacks were able to do and build That being said, the way the Diamondbacks built their team wasn't just sitting around and waiting for their draft picks to develop, or rather even just sitting around and just drafting. They traded players away to get other prospects that would help them going forward. And that was something that the Rockies didn't do in 2021 and 2022. 2022, they were the only team in MLB to not make a trade to help bolster their depth in the minor leagues. And that's one of the reasons why they lost 100 games in 2023, because they had no depth. It really seemed like losing 100 games was going to be that antidote in a poor choice of phrase, but the antidote of like, okay, something's wrong here. Things need to change. This is embarrassing. This is something that the organization prided itself on. I don't really know what the Rockies are priding themselves on now at this point, besides being an entertaining, besides playing at an entertaining venue and being a nice spot for people to go and, see the opposing team in the middle of Denver and have a couple names that you're familiar with. So it's cozy, but it's also very, complacent. I find that to be the big word surrounding the organization. It's been that way for the last couple of years, is complacency.
Yeah, and we talk about it a lot here, but to hear you say it, Patrick, and I know, I mean, you're there, you're talking to the guys, and I know in the back of the minds of the players, it's a big deal. Like, I know how much respect they have for everyone in that organization. I do like the fact that the Rockies are a loyal team. They're very loyal to people. They take good care of people, but we're just looking at results here, and that's what we're talking about. We got to take a quick break, and let's lighten it up here with some fun stuff, because what we got, torpedoes, we got leaks we got to talk about here, Patrick. Just some fun stuff to wrap up the show here. Obviously, the Rockies playing the Phillies, but we'll get it all. There's plenty of time for us to react to that. Let's talk about some torpedo bats and stuff coming up next here on today's episode of Locked On Rockies. Before we do that, though, got to tell you about the folks that help make this show possible, and that includes Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. You can get insights into where your money's going, how your money's being spent, just how much you are spending on those streaming services or delivery to help make you make smart choices. Plus, you can work together with your partner to make sure that you're managing your money is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Yes, that's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com when you use the code LOCKEDONMLB for 50% off your first year. Locked On Rockies here, wrapping things up with Patrick Lyons, the Rockies Insider. That's where you go on all the socials and YouTube, the Rockies Insider, for more daily Rockies coverage here. Patrick, we hear from Spilly that the Rockies have indeed ordered some torpedo bats. Is this I don't mind the idea. I think it's actually a pretty cool idea and a possibility that might help some people, but kind of a fad type thing, right? We don't need to get super overworked about the torpedo bats, because I'm not surprised to see Ellie De La Cruz doing Ellie De La Cruz things.
Yeah, I think in a month from now, no one's talking about this, because the torpedo shaped bats are ones that only help certain hitters that strike the ball in a certain spot on the bat. And I think when those, guys realize that, oh, you know what, the baseballs I tend to hit on the end of the bat that were base hits, now they're becoming outs. I don't like that. That's not a big change. I think a lot of guys are just viewing it, looking at more of the positives and the upsides versus the downsides that exist there, and not even realizing that this kind of bat or this style isn't necessarily going to be a good fit for them like it is for a couple of the Yankees.
Well, the buzzword was Chris Bryant was getting one. So do you think that it might possibly be something to help Chris Bryant? I mean, at this point, he might be looking to say, hey, anything, I'll do anything to get something going here.
I don't think it'll necessarily help him, but you like trying something new, right? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Well, KB and a couple of the other Rockies trying something different. And so you applaud them for doing that. You certainly could look at that and almost I don't want to say mock them, but just say like, oh, see, they have no idea what's going on. No, they're trying something new, trying something different to get better. It shows that they do care. And despite the fact that, again, there being some kind of subconscious, fog of complacency surrounding the organization as a whole, each individual person is still going out there trying their best. And I think this is an example of that.
All right, I know we're out of time here, but you and a couple of other eagle-eyed Rockies fans out there were well, you're a lot more than a Rockies fan, I should say that. I don't want to trample on the credibility here, Patrick, but seems like we might be seeing those new jerseys. Are they powder? I can't really figure out those. Is it like a powder purple, not like powder blue? I can't quite figure out what this possible color scheme is.
I think mathematically, if I know my colors, powdered purple would be lavender. But yeah, I you know what? I honestly, I posted something on Tuesday and I decided to take it down because I want fans to be surprised when they finally do make that announcement. But I have since seen a second rendering of what the City Connect uniforms are going to look like. So basically that Nike Air Max 970s that, are making the rounds last week. Those are definitely going to be the colors. It seems like maybe a light blue might be the bulk of the color with, yellow, red, orange, similar to the, the flag of the state, the Colorado state flag. But I think these are going to end up looking really nice, and it's not going to look like the state flag of Colorado, which I think a lot of people were, they've been just
we're all over it, right? If you're from Colorado, and I had the Colorado flag, I got one folded up. I'm with everyone here, but let's be real. The Colorado flag was, it got a little overused.
So I think this will be almost like a nod to it by just going just left of center with a lot of the different colors, which again are the colors of Colorado. When you think about the blue sky and the white for the Columbine flower, all these other things. So I think this will end up being okay. I don't know. I don't think they're going to have the mountains again like they did with the license plate jerseys. Those are just perfect, and I'm very sad to see them go. But the color scheme that's out there, I think it's legit. I think it's going to still be really solid and may end up still being one of the top 10 in all of baseball, because the green and whites, I think just about everybody in their top 10 list had the Rockies in there. I think this one has a really strong chance of continuing that trend.
Yeah, and the Rockies ended up having one of the best City Connects out there, and I was a fan of the green pants. I'm not gonna lie, I thought they were cool too. Patrick, I know we're a little late, so we are gonna run here, but got to make sure that people know that we talk Rockies daily here. But Patrick, he's going to be in the clubhouse. He's going to be at Coors, one of the best in the biz to follow here. Where can people make sure they're going to stay up to date with all of your work?
At Patrick D. Lyons, MLB, and the Rockies Insider channel on YouTube has plenty of inside the clubhouse video conversations, behind the scene things that are going on before and after games all throughout the 2025 season. In fact, get caught up on what you might have missed in spring training as well, if you're interested in that. So appreciate you having me on, Paul.
Patrick, thank you so much, folks. This has been your Locked On Rockies for today. We'll be back in action real soon. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, this is Paul Holden saying so long from the Locked On Rockies podcast.